dichotomy between the increase in the tax bill and the increase in the valuation. And as Mr. Callaghan says, for someone who's not selling their house, maybe that's not too much comfort if they're going to live here forever, though eventually someone's going to realize that value. Unfortunately, not the people who live in the home, maybe, but someone's going to realize that value. But I was more pointing out the difference between how much your value's gone up and what kind of investment that is. You know, what you're investing in your tax bill versus your value. I wasn't questioning the way.
I didn't think you were.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear.
Mr. Reitmeyer.
I got a question for Mr. Simmons. I think that was my house you were referring to.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Somebody else's. We'll remain nameless for obvious reasons.
Must have been a twin of mine because mine went up 38% last year. But, you know, I'm looking at this graph, and if you explain it to a dumb Dutchman, my house, my property increased 38%, which means the value went way up. But I'm looking now at this commercial property, and I just don't understand this. Now, even though I've been attending these meetings for the last 10 years. In the fiscal year 2000, this person that you got up there was paying $3,900. Now, in fiscal 202, looks like around $3,700. So, as my property went up 38%, the commercial property went down in value?
No, this is taxation.
Well, his bill was less than mine. Didn't his bill decrease while mine went up?
This is his value. His value went up while his bill decreased because there was a shift in money from commercial property onto residential property. And that, we talked about that this a little bit last year. We can definitely talk about it again this year. But there is, unfortunately, in North Reading, a tendency for residential properties to increase more quickly than commercial properties.
All right, but again, the chart you just had there shows that his bill went down. So apparently his valuation of his property went down.
No, if you look at this is a valuation trend in his property. If you notice, it's gone up consistently. It didn't go up as dramatically as the single-family home. I can go back to that. This is the value trend of the single-family home. And you notice this increase here, probably should have superimposed these.
Yeah,
This is much more dramatic than it was for the commercial property.
but I don't know, maybe I'm just not getting that point because I see a decrease in his tax bill and an increase in mine.
Right.
Dick, let me try.
Okay.
Excuse me, one that's here, information. If the tax rate is the same for both of us, his valuation went up, yet his tax bill went down. But I don't get it.
You want to try?
Yeah, I'm going to try.
I'm sorry.
If it doesn't work, can I leave?
But I will become chairman. That's for sure.
The rise in residential value was on a proportional basis that so much larger than the rise in the commercial value. I mean, the commercial value rose, but it was almost a flat curve. I mean, it was just a slight. While the residential value was, just flying up. It was, almost straight up. So what happens is, when you have the single rate, you de facto shift, the burden shifts so that as a percentage of the total tax bill being paid, because you're single rate, the residential portion of the total billing becomes greater.
Then can I declare my property commercial? Because I'd like to have.
What are you selling?
Well, we have someone from CPC here, maybe you can talk to them after this.
No, but I mean, it just seems so unfair when you see the values going up so great for the property, and yet the commercial establishment paid less in actual dollars. His check that he wrote out was less money than the check that I wrote out in increase.
As it relates to the increase, yes.
Excuse me. Could I just make a comment?
Sure.
Dick is using a particular commercial property here, and he's using a particular residential property. This isn't an average. This is one particular guy who hasn't seen the same kind of increase that maybe some other commercial properties have seen. I think we may have some commercial property owners here. Have any of you seen increases in your tax bills over the last few years? So they haven't all gone down.
I'm looking at CHOP, and then they see a 38% increase last year.
No, I understand.
No, and that's the point, is that proportionally, the residential values have increased so much. And then last year, those residential values were all on the lower end of, you know, the value spectrum. They were not the newer homes, they were the older subdivisions, you know, for lack of a better term, you know, the starter homes. North Reading is a desirable place to live. And
If
so,
you can afford it.
if you can afford it. But that's what drove, but again, this is art, not science, it's all driven by the market. So you had sellers selling and buyers willing to pay more than the asking price. I mean, you look at the values, and I can only speak for my own circumstance. I look at what I paid for my house, and I thought I paid too much then, and then I heard the appraisal when I refinanced, and I said, you know, I almost said, well, let's get out, you know, but, you know, where would I go? Where would I go? And what would I be able to get? So it's, and there will come a time when, you know, the higher end will again grow faster than the lower end, and so forth and so on. And unfortunately, it's not just one tide and all the boats don't get lifted. It's like a tsunami.
Well, it's a very dynamic structure, you know, the structure of a community. When you see the values changing, they change dynamically.
But that and I went over some of those numbers in the spring, and it was after the reval, and I went over some of those numbers with Mr. Simmons, and they had just done a revaluation, which was to quote unquote put us back to, you know, sort of fair market value on everything, and there were properties not marketed, sold. You go to the banker and tradesman, and you can get what sells and the selling price. They had sold 75% of what we had just reevaluated it for, which is just phenomenal. And again, it's all driven by the fact that this is a desirable place to live. Mr. Smith.
Yeah, one thing you alluded to a little earlier, and you had mentioned it to Dick, and he said, yes, we are. And you said, when you increase these properties 5%, is it across the board? And I heard the answer was yes. If that's true, then I certainly would have no problem with an increase in value, because if everybody goes up 5% and the values go up 5%, then naturally the tax rate is going to come down to reflect the increase
It's
in
an even
value.
shift.
So if it's a 5% increase across the board, I don't think anybody has a beef with that. The beef is if it's not 5% across the board, and I mean new homes, old homes, commercial properties, everything else. That was a question you had asked him, and he said, yes, it's going to be a 5% increase across the board. If that's true, nobody's going to pay any more than their fair share, and nobody's tax bill is actually going to change any more than the 2.5% increase in the levy. So, if in fact that's true what he said, is it going to be a 5%?
The interims, Dick, if I may, the interims are more level set,
They're level set. There are some
within categories.
there are some exceptions to that. The classification 102s, which are condo units, went up in most instances 10%, because the pressure on those units is so enormous, because it's the only way a person can really buy into the town inexpensively. They shot up. Now, the one exception to that is the greens. For some reason, the rates or the ratio stayed fairly stable in the greens, and we didn't increase those at all. So there are two exceptions. Greens didn't go up at all, and all the condo units went up 10%. Other than that, all the condo units went up 10%.
But then the rest were, it was even handed.
Right. The rest was even.
Right, which, and again, that's only on the interim. When they do the reval, it'll be, different properties will different
Yeah,
parts
and
of
I can
town, we'll be
understand
all
that,
over the place.
but I also know that a lot of people that have a lot of money buy big expensive homes, keep them for 2 years to turn a profit. And that profit is usually 20%, so if that tells me those properties are increasing in value 10% a year, and what we saw when they did the reval, the interim reval mainly, no, it was the reval. When they did the reval, the low-end houses went up dramatically, like George at 38%, and the new homes went up, some of them went down. The tax bills actually went down.
Right, but again, that's, we have to remember that this is driven by the market, and
Oh, I know it's
that-
driven
that-
by it, there's no question, and
and
you're right.
people, people want to move into North Reading, and when they can't get into the homes, they direct themselves towards the condominium market, and that makes those prices go up.
I'm just thinking of fairness, so that everybody can keep their
But,
homes.
yeah,
Thank you, Jim.
Jack Cashman had his hand
yeah, I'll get to Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Simmons, going back to the what appears to be different percentage increases in the amount of taxation between commercial and residential in terms of the burden that's being paid, the shift. What kind of shift are we looking at in order to bring that back in line, where they would reline up? Do you know what I mean? Where you were showing, I'm sorry, I can't recall the title of the slide that you had.
This is,
Right.
it's commercial values, commercial property trends.
No,
That's
the
one.
taxation,
Thank you.
taxation.
Go back.
Go back to,
I think it was one of George's, actually, wasn't it?
Was it one of George's?
Yeah, I think it was one of George's.
I thought it was,
the,
no, it was a graph.
Yeah, like that.
Bar graph.
Yeah, it was a,
like that?
Yeah.
That's the shift in the commercial rate if we classify the rate.
okay.
Do you want me
In
to go
terms
forward?
of, yeah, in terms of looking at a classification shift, where do we get in terms of leveling this out? I mean, Mr. Reitmeyer asked the question of how come their taxes are going down and mine are going up. What would the shift have to be so that everybody was a little bit closer to going up at the same rate? I'm not sure if I'm being clear.
No, you're being perfectly clear. I understand where you're going. I'm at a loss. You ask me a question, I'm gonna have a hard time answering.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I
Mrs. Bev?
I don't think that you can quite look at it that way, because you can't falsely value a property. I think what you're asking, Kevin, is, if you picked a commercial property and said, okay, to even out the tax burden here, you can get $400,000 for your property, but when that person goes to sell it, they find out the market value is really $300,000. They've unfairly invested in their property in the form of taxes without that return. I think if you want to shift, so I don't think that you can automatically, you can't play with the value of a property.
No,
I'm not talking about the value.
Mr.
It's
Kelly,
not-
But the shift, to answer your question, 0.21%, is that what you're asking? 0.21%, the residential
Right.
part of North Reading's tax rate is 0.21%. And I talked to
That's
Mr.
right.
Dow about this a little bit today, more this year. If you look at shifting it, say, to 110% toward commercial,
Right.
that would shift about, and correct me if I'm wrong, George, but we talked about this today, about 1.5%
Okay.
toward commercial.
Commercial.
Residential. So if you want to extrapolate that out, I haven't done the math, but you could say 1.02, something like that. Might even out, so you're not getting any, so you're leaving that. Does that answer your question? Kevin?
It's getting to, it's in the direction that I was
So
headed
I
with this.
just thought that was maybe the direction you're headed, because I talked a little bit about that with George today.
In terms of
For what that's worth.
fairness type of issue. Kind of shifting the burden back, we shifted it in one direction here, and we had large increases in certain neighborhoods. I'm wondering if we could shift again to kind of balance this out.
Just, I hear where you're going with that, and just to play devil's advocate for a moment, if North Reading continues to be a great place to live, then, and Mr. Reitmeyer experiences another 2 years from now, right, 2 years from now, we do another reval, full reval, and he gets another 40% shift.